Hello and welcome to the Beyond 6 Seconds podcast. I'm your host, Carolyn Keel, and today I am very excited to be joined by my guest, Kori Tomelden. Kori is a late diagnosed autistic ADHDer, life strategist for autistic and ADHD women, and a transformational purpose coach. She's currently located in Albany, New York, where she's raising a neurodivergent family. Her older daughter is non-speaking autistic and also has ADHD and anxiety, and her younger daughter is HSP, or highly sensitive person, and gifted. As an empath, HSP, and highly intuitive individual, Kori brings her own life experiences as an autistic woman, combined with her adventures in momming, entrepreneurship, and homemaking to bring you the day-to-day of her life at home. Kori, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Carolyn. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here. So yeah, mentioned in your bio that you are late diagnosed ADHD and autism. So tell me about the process around getting your diagnosis, like what prompted it and how did that all happen?
Well, it actually started at about 2011, 2012. I was nearing the end of a almost 10-year marriage, and my whole identity just started to shift and change. And it was just this realization of, wow, I don't really know who I am. And so I started on this whole self-discovery process as far as reclaiming my purpose, reclaiming my identity outside of the societal things.
Yeah.
And so that continued for, like I said, that was back 2011, 2012. And as my autistic daughter was getting older, I was looking for more ways to support her as an adult as opposed to, a teenager. And as I was looking into things and strategies and stuff like that could help her, I just started noticing things. It's like, wait a minute, this is kind of, I could resonate with it, or some of the struggles. So I'm a big quiz junkie, and I was looking into more resources on how to support highly sensitive people, because that's how I've always identified. It's one of the things I've identified with. And one of those quizzes led me to crossover between HSP and ADHD. It was like, oh, I don't think I'd ever considered that particular path. So I started looking more into the ADHD pieces of it. And around 2018, 2019 is when I did my own self-diagnosis after taking numerous, tests and everything, with ADHD inattentive type, or what used to be ADD.
Right.
And so I carried that with me, and then I finally I wanted to know whether that was really the case or if it was just all in my head. I've always been a proponent of doing what works best for the individual. Some people are very opposed to being on medication. Some people aren't. And I've been one of those individuals that, because of my own, existing mental health issues, it was, okay, maybe I do need to be on medication for something until I can learn how to manage it better. So that was why I sought out an official diagnosis. And that was the March or April of 2021. And I walked out of that evaluation with both the ADHD inattentive and autism level 1.
Wow.
It was like, oh, okay. So one I was fully expecting, and the other one was just really out of the blue. But it also sent me further into research mode, which is what I did after my autistic daughter's diagnosis. And yeah, so much just started to make sense after that. It was just kind of mind-blowing, just how many things were falling into place and clicking, and it's like, oh, okay. So that's why the stuff that I was doing for my autistic daughter was also helping me. Oh. Who knew? So
yeah, it's amazing how a lot of the journeys towards diagnosis they're multi-year. So it's not just something that happens one day, like, oh, okay, I'm going to take a few tests and get it. Like, some other types of diagnoses, I guess, are that way, but certainly with autism and ADHD and other, a lot of other neurodivergent conditions like that, it takes a while. It's a lot of, as you said, and you have to do I feel like a lot of self-research and, just so because there's all different types of tests.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too is that, especially for women, that it either goes misdiagnosed or it goes just completely undiagnosed until such later in life that and not for a lot of us, but for those of us who are moms, that's when we start questioning things, because we look at our kids, it's like, okay. So
yeah. And I've heard that too, is a lot of times when women get diagnosed, it's when they have children who are, showing the early signs when they're very young of ADHD or autism. And then, as you look into that, that's where that diagnosis comes from sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you mentioned sort of looking back a little bit on your life and saying, oh, now I understand why certain things make sense and why I, thought or worked in certain ways. So I guess, looking back into childhood, what was it like growing up, I guess, undiagnosed? Like, were there things growing up that in terms of how you thought or behaved or acted that now looking back, we're like, oh, okay, I could see how this ties into my diagnosis?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because after I got the diagnosis, my mom saved a lot of my school files. And I remember in one of them in particular, it was like an elementary school, I had been diagnosed with a learning disability. And I struggled big time with like math concepts. I was great with English, great with, with history, with social studies. Once I got into something on science, I was great with that, but I struggled big time with math. My handwriting has always been a little bit on the atrocious side. And I was one of those kids that, like, I finished my tests really, really early before everybody else. And I would just sit there, like, looking around and kind of fidgeting. And it was oh, Kori, can you go take this to this teacher? Or can you go take this to the office? Or, just so I wasn't distracting other kids. And, so that kind of, it clicked into place, which was the other thing I had eventually was part of my self-diagnosis process, was the dyscalculia. Because people talk about dyslexia, which is reversing letters, and dyscalculia is the number, like, to dumb it down, the numbers version of dyslexia. And, as I was also looking at a friend of mine website, she talks a lot about hyperlexia and autism. And I started reading at a fairly young age. I've always been above my grade level as far as reading. And I was the one who was, while other kids were reading basic basic chip books, I read the entire Little House on the Prairie series in second grade, third grade, and Anne of Green Gables and Little Women I had read by fourth grade. And my mom and I, like, we were talking about this too, was that in the summer between my 7th and 8th grade, so I was maybe 12, 13, I read Wuthering Heights.
Wow.
For fun. It's like, oh, okay. So yeah, it was just looking back on all of these different things. And now that I look back on it, I've always been a people watcher. Like, I love watching people. And I'm one of those people that I will go to the park. Well, used to, I would go to the park, to the mall, wherever it was, and not to interact with people, but to observe. I love watching human behavior. And, I've come to realize that it wasn't just I wanted to see how people were reacting. I was looking at societal norms and body language and just that kind of thing, because I needed to know, I guess. And I was, yes, and I was always what you'd call a people pleaser, because it was the acceptance, that great need for acceptance and needing to fit in. So, and a perfectionist. I've always been, now I call myself a recovering perfectionist, recovering people pleaser. I'm still a people watcher just because I love psychology and behavior. Like I said, human behavior. It's just, it fascinates me on all levels. Like, yeah.
Yeah. And I can see the connection with now you becoming a coach, that, you know, the whole people watching and interest in psychology like totally ties in.
Yeah. And, you know, like over the years, that was one of the careers that I'd wanted to get into. Was when I was younger, I wanted to be a criminal psychologist. And I had told my mom, I was like, I want to be a criminal psychologist and I want to work specifically with death row inmates. And she just looked at me. She was like, why? It's like, because I want to know why they did what they did. I want to know their motivation. I want to know their childhood, their everything. And this must have been just like 10 or 11. I love those crime shows. So
We're ahead of your time, actually.
Yeah.
With the true crime podcasts and all that.
Yeah, I love those things, all of those things. But now, as I've been looking into it, there's, in the autistic terminology, it's the hyperfixation. So it's that deep like interest that you just have, or focuses. Psychology and human behavior has always been one of mine. And I think after getting my diagnosis, it just made it that much more, and added that extra layer of, okay, it's not just the neurotypical brain wiring, but it's also neurodivergent brain wiring. And that for me was also fascinating. And so now I still want to be able to study in psychology. It's not about having, you know, fancy letters or being able to say, oh, I'm a doctor or anything like that. It's really just about furthering that on knowledge and that understanding. So I've been looking into neuropsychology or neuroscience or behavioral science, and eventually I'd like to pursue my PhD in that area.
Very cool. Yeah, it's such an interesting field. I wound up getting my master's in psychology and my bachelor's in psychology as well. So mine's on the business side, but yeah, I just love, you know, as you said, just understanding human behavior and settings. Absolutely. So were you a coach before you got your official diagnoses, or has that started or changed since you got?
I was actually. I started as a parenting coach for parents of autistic children, and specifically for, you know, non-speaking autistics or for girls. Because, you know, it's in the United States, pretty much pounded into us that 1 in every 4 children is diagnosed with autism, and the majority are boys.
Yeah.
So the majority of the resources and the research out there is still for boys. That's great. I'm glad that the research is out there and that the resources are available. But for girls, there's this whole other level of, like, one of the first things that I had learned was that for girls, autistic girls, by the time they hit puberty, you have to look out for epilepsy. Wow. Because that becomes one of the most co-occurring or comorbid conditions. I was very lucky with my daughter. We missed that. But it's also then just looking at their social struggles and all the other things that happen in girls that do happen in boys, but I think aren't as pronounced. And then also for the non-speaking autistic population, because we talk about, you know, there's a lot of resources out there. Again, it's for what used to be the high functioning, or they would call it Asperger's syndrome. Right. Now it's, I believe, autism level 1. The DSM just needs to, I have a whole rant on that, but
yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it's that whole thing there too, is that, okay, and I get it too, is that my experience with my daughter isn't going to be the exact same as somebody else's experience because, environment and all that. But what I wanted to do was just be very open and very honest about the things that I'd done as far as changing the environment around her, as far as adapting the environment around her, instead of trying to change her.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing wrong with her. And so that was my mission as a parenting coach, was to not just educate, but to also kind of help parents reframe the thinking that there's something wrong with my child. I have to fix my child. Your child is not broken. There is nothing wrong with them. Change the environment around your child instead of the other way around.
Yeah.
Because, and yes, also adapt and help, but equip and empower them to, just to face everything, but not in such a way that you're trying to lessen who they are and what they can do. And, so I did that from about 2016 to 2020, beginning of 2021. And I also helped with IEP coaching, with, calming strategies, and it was half strategies that they could use with their children and half strategies that they could use for themselves. Because it's also about managing your own needs as a parent.
Yeah.
And moms, again, we tend to just put ourselves on the back burner. And when you're parenting from that high level of stress and burnout, you're not really putting yourself in a great place to even human, let alone parent. And so that was the other big thing. And so often I would have my clients send me emails, or we'd get on a coaching call and say, wow, the strategies that we were putting in place to help with my child's meltdowns were really helping me too. Or, some of these other things. It's like, oh, well, that's interesting. So yeah, so then as I was further into my own self-diagnosis process, and then after the formal diagnosis, I was like, you know what? It's time for me to change. I absolutely love working with parents. That's been one of my favorite things, and especially moms, just because, again, we put ourselves on the back burner, like, oh, I can handle this. Like, no. You need to take care of you first, and then you can go handle the things. So that's been where I've made my biggest shift. It wasn't just working on parenting strategies, but now working on life strategies. And so that's where I decided to make that change.
Yeah. Wow. And that's powerful. I feel like, especially now more than ever, the pandemic has really shown just how little support moms in general have, never mind if you have a child who, has autism or ADHD or any kind of, needs like that, and just really needing that support. And I think a lot of times the advice that parents get is around, it's more on the medical model side versus the social, change the environment, take care of yourself side. So
yeah, which, I mean, you need the medical side of it. I'm not, you need those things too. And especially over the pandemic, like you were just saying, okay, so virtual school sucked all around for every child. Let's just get that out of the way. But for autistic kids, or for kids with ADHD, any child really who has an IEP, the individual education plan, or even a 504 plan, it was not the academic piece that they were missing out on. Yes, the academics were important, but they were missing out on the occupational therapy, the speech therapy, the physical therapy, all of those added supports. And then you're putting that on the parents to be able to provide that. And just the stress levels were just through the roof.
Yeah.
And, I think about it like, if we hadn't had those things in place already at home, I would have lost it.
Yeah.
So that was the big thing that I carried through with 2020 was, teaching parents. It's like, all right, so this is how you can set up certain things at home, how you can do functional life skills at home that will also tie into areas of occupational therapy and stuff like that. And, I ran into some pushback of, well, you're not an occupational therapist or speech therapist or special education teacher, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, you're right, I'm not. I didn't go to school for those things, but I have, 18 years of hands-on experience with these things. So take it as you will, adapt it as you need it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That lived experience definitely counts a lot when it comes to these types of strategies and problem solving around the wild environment we've been in for the past 2 years.
Yeah, that's been, yeah.
Wow. So, so do you also work with women who are autistic or have ADHD who aren't parents, or is it mainly with families that you work?
Women in general, it's just because it's that whole, again, we go through so much of our lives, I'm finding either being misdiagnosed or late diagnosed. And I think once you do begin that diagnosis process, you get hit with so much. And so that's where I want to be able to come in to support. So it's not just for moms, it's women in general, just because we have that, not that men don't have struggles too, obviously they do, but females and also for those who identify as women, we have this different, it's just different. I don't know how else to describe it. But, no matter how much progress has been made in society for, equality and all of that, there's still not a level of equality. Women are still not quite second-class citizens, in most of the, like, United States, United Kingdom, Canada, wherever, but we're still not seen as men are in the same position, and it's ridiculous. So, but yeah, that's why I wanted to work with women in general. I didn't want to just say, oh, I'm only working with moms. Will my heart and soul always be with the moms? Absolutely. But I recognize it's not just moms who need help. It's women in general. We still need help.
Yeah, that's powerful. And again, really the pandemic, I think, really highlighted a lot of those ways in which, women are, do not have complete equality to men. We didn't even think about it. And it's like, I don't even want to get into that discussion and the things
that's
right now, what's going on. But
like, there are some things that as I start thinking about them, I'm like, wow, I could go rant about this for days on end and still probably not have, still have more to say.
Yeah. And it's great that you provide support to women like that, because I feel like in addition to all of the challenges that women face now and in society, especially autistic women, because I was lucky enough in my diagnosis that I had a really supportive diagnostician who gave me resources once I got it. But I think a lot of times women just get the diagnosis like, okay, enjoy, like, good luck. And then that's like, figure it out.
Either that or they get questioned.
Yeah.
And it's like, why are you seeking a diagnosis so late in life? What do you think it's going to do? I'm like, I'm trying to understand. It's not about finding out, oh, I have this diagnosis. It's not an excuse. It's not an explanation. I'm trying to understand. And I'm trying to understand myself.
Yeah.
So help me out here.
Right. Yeah. It's almost a double bind because there's so much doubt around self-diagnosis, but at the same time,
Oh yeah.
diagnosis is not accessible for many people. And even when you get official diagnosis, you still get questioned. So yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. And that's just it too. It's like, well, why didn't you get diagnosed as a child or blah, blah, blah. I'm like, look, I'm not having this conversation with you.
Like, did you read the DSM when I was a child?
Yeah, I'm like, did you see what it was like? Did you see the criteria? Again, DSM, I could rant about that like a big time.
Yeah. It takes a while for it to catch up with. Like,
it does.
Life. Yeah.
It does.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that's great that you provide that support because people really need it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah. And you also have a podcast like that. So yeah,
I do.
Tell me about your podcast.
Well, my podcast, when I started it, okay, so this evolved as well. I had started a podcast called Autism Family Life, which was just about talking about autism, everyday family life, and things like that. And then I took almost a year and a half pandemic off from recording new episodes. And then it's like, no, you know what? I need to bring this podcast back. And at that point was when I had I just gotten my diagnosis. It's like, oh, okay, I'm going to bring the podcast back. And it started out as Autism ADHD and me. Because it's like, you know, I'll keep talking about this. And then that also shifted to what it is now. It's Authentically Autistic and ADHD. So it's showing up fully and authentically as autistic and ADHD without worrying and without caring so much about the judgment or the doubts, and fully unmasked, which was another thing that I've had to kind of explain to people. Because, you know, pandemic, we associate that with having to wear a mask. Like, right. No. I'm talking about a social mask or camouflaging. It's hiding what makes you a neurodivergent, whether you're autistic, ADHD, dyslexic. I can't remember all of the ones that are under there, but it's hiding what makes you in that to appear normal. And that's stressful in and of itself. And it's like, no, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm done. So that's how it all changed. And that's the name of my podcast. That's where I hang out on Instagram and YouTube. It's my website. It's who I am.
That's great. Yeah, I think the process of unmasking is one that takes many months and years, and especially for women. And this is probably why autism doesn't get taught in general, because many neurotypical women mask just because that's what society says we should be doing. And then you add autistic masking on top of it.
And that, you know, that was why I started my whole self-discovery process. Was, holy crap, I've been taking on everything that society expected me to be as a mom, as a stay-at-home mom, as a homemaker, as whatever else that I was carrying. I completely lost my identity to all of that. It sucks.
Yeah.
It really sucks.
Yeah. Well, that's good that you are using the podcast as a way to unmasked and just talk more about, you know, what's going on, and then help educate other people and help other people identify, because I'm sure so many listeners must identify with what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, it's that, and it's also just kind of explaining the things out there, like the executive functioning and emotional regulation and all these other things that we don't really had or didn't have names for or didn't have the terms for, and breaking it down and saying, it's like, all right, well, this is what it is, but this is how it shows up, or this is how it could show up. And that was one of the other big things for me, was being both autistic and having ADHD. It's like there's a lot of overlap between the two of them.
Yeah.
So I looked at the areas of the overlap and I was like, all right, I can work on the things that are overlapping and then maybe address some of the others. So it wasn't just saying, oh, this is how I'm going to help the autistic piece, or this is how I help the ADHD piece. It's like, no, they come together at some point. Let me see where they're overlapping and go from there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, as I learn more about autism and ADHD, I was really like kind of surprised at how many overlaps there are.
Yeah.
Now I
Yeah.
understand why there's so much misdiagnosis with things.
Yeah.
Like it's hard. There's, they work together. Sometimes they work, kind of contradicting each other a bit, but yeah, it all depends on the individual too.
Yeah, that's also a big thing. And wait, I described it to somebody who was like, yeah, being autistic and ADHD is like having iOS and Android installed on the same phone. It's very similar operating systems, but different functions. So it's
wow, yeah. That's a good description of it.
Yeah.
So, wow. So yeah, looking long term, do you have any particular like long term goals for either your coaching business or your podcast that you've been thinking about?
Long term, I would love to just continue doing this and supporting women, and not just with the coaching, but also eventually I want to be able to certify coaches, and in particular the neurodivergent women, so that it's not just ourselves that we're helping, but then we're helping the next generation or the next person. And it's also the financial empowerment piece, because a 9-to-5 job is so hard I had a really hard time holding a traditional job. No wonder. And it's one of those other common struggles that I see out there. So being able to provide that avenue as well. And with my podcast, I'd love for it to keep growing and to keep touching people. And if I'm only impacting one person's life, then I call that a win. If I can never get over my nerves and my stage fright, I'd love to have a TEDx talk and to be a speaker. And I know I have at least one book in me, so that's also on my goals.
Right. That's great. Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, how can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about your coaching or your podcast or the work that?
Well, I am Authentically Autistic and ADHD on Instagram. I have a Facebook page there, a Facebook group, a YouTube channel, and it's also my website. And that's the major ways to find me. The podcast is available on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts, all of the majors. So yeah. I've got new episodes that come out weekly. And then on the YouTube channel right now, I have new videos that drop almost daily. That was the advice I was given to grow. It's like, all right, let me see what I can do. And yeah, so that's been, if I had to pick between, I love both YouTube and the podcasting, just because I don't have to be quite as hands-on as I do with social media. So
yeah, no, it's all very different, all the marketing and all the content creation, but that's awesome. Yeah, wow, daily episodes. That's so cool. Awesome. All right, perfect. So I'll put links to your website and podcast and YouTube links in the show notes so people can find it there.
Great.
All right. Well, Kori, thank you so much for being on my show. As we close out, is there anything else that you'd like our listeners to know, or anything that they can help or support you with?
If I had anything else to say, it's just prioritize yourself. Because if you can't prioritize yourself, then you can't show up to be the things that you want to be. And yeah, just do that to the best of your ability on any given day.
It's important. Yeah, we have to take care of ourselves in order to be able to take care of everything else in our lives and everybody else.
Right.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Kori. It was great talking to you. Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you again, Carolyn. I'm honored to be here.